I always enjoy talking with Michael Tsarion, and this was perhaps my favorite conversation yet. Knowing of Michael's deep knowledge of the Druidic culture, I asked him if we could switch topics at the last moment and speak to the reemergence of the feminine. He kindly obliged, and we took a deep look at the suppression of women throughout history and the need for the feminine to come to the forefront again for the sake of humanity. Michael, since we last talked, I found it rather interesting in that a lot of the women, a lot of them are very outspoken, some of them are more or less well-known in the alternative media, including friends of mine and myself, are having this experience that something of a very deep and moving nature seems to be surfacing, and it's taking the shape of a type of anger. And I'm realizing it's from a collective connection to a larger consciousness, a memory, if you will. Not that there's not every good reason for women to have some of this bubbling to the surface, but there's been in your work, a concerted effort to make sure that women in particular stay particularly asleep. Can you talk to us just a little bit about, even from an occultist point of view, and some of what goes on in the darkest reaches that most of us don't have awareness of?
Well, women have been suppressed in hundreds of ways for years, and that suppression is not just a physical oppression. From outside, it's the implanting of inferior idioms within the consciousness of the female. It also is a misrepresentation of what is femininity in general. We may not even have a clear understanding of what femininity and masculinity are, because a lot of people don't realize there's a huge difference between what is male and female and masculine and feminine, and will use those terms interchangeably, which is okay on the street level, but when you're trying to be more technical about it, you get into all sorts of problems. And this is actually a huge thing. I hope that people will think about it, because in fact what you're seeing in the world today are basically people who have murdered their own femininity and masculinity, make up for that fact by the cosmetic industry, who provides simulacras, false personas of masculine and femininity as they have contrived it. People conform to those models, and this is what we have now walking about in society. So very few people today have a good sense of their own masculinity and femininity. You're speaking specifically about women, and that's where I would come in, is that women today have lost all sense of what it is to be feminine. Because in order to even be able to coexist in the world, gain success, they've had to become masculinized. It's been demanded. It may be unspoken, meaning that a person's parents may not sit down and give this as a lecture to the average teenage girl. But society is permeated with that unless you suit up like a guy, unless you cosmetize yourself according to certain models that they put on television, unless you completely have beaten yourself up about your looks, about your complexion, about your height, about your level of intelligence, about your applicability, your intelligence level, your levels of approval, you see? And so now you have girls who are entirely fixated on winning that approval. But of course what happens in society is we often may want something, we may have expectations, we may not get it. So what happens to these adolescents is that they then jump through all these hoops, force their parents to buy them things, conform to what their peer groups are talking about, microanalyze all the media out there in order to fit these preposterous stereotypes, and then not get the very approval from a psychopathic, broken society that was the promissory note.
But isn't it designed to make sure that that approval is never given?
Yes, it is, and that is the crux of then where the neurosis comes in, because when we don't get the approval that we falsely need, I mean, my work ultimately works on why we would even need that approval, but that's another area. Since you do need it, since your whole psychology is geared towards receiving it, you will do two things. One, you will do anything, including self-murder, to get it. You will become a completely attuned, acculturated person, because you feel that I will get it if I jump through these hoops, if I look like the latest model, if my speech is, the way that I speak is born from television lingo, if I mimic, and if I conform. And the other thing is then when you find out that you're not really getting the approval, then comes the inevitable neuroses. And it's at this point when the neurosis sets in that Big Brother is watching. This is what Big Brother's hoping for. He's not really empowered while you're going through the early stages. He is empowered when you start becoming neurotic, because the neurotic individual is far more susceptible to control.
Yes.
This affects women more than men, because men historically have been able to outroject or project their anger, because you were talking about anger, and this is all satellite to these emotions. Men have been able to bounce a basketball, kick a football around, have a bar fight, go hunting, go off to war if necessary, kill entire peoples and all the rest of it in order to exorcise and expatiate all of this pent-up emotion and anger and so on. The difference is that women have not been allowed to do that historically. They introject. Of course, that now the introjection plays in yet to another Leviathan, which is the big pharma. Because when you introject anger, you have skin breakouts, you have bad eyesight, you will have a whole cocktail of other, mostly biological issues, including anorexia, by the way, which is self-hatred expressed outwardly, or bulimia, and all the other cocktail.
It's a slow suicide of sorts.
Well, it is, ultimately. Yes. And then what happens is, Big Brother's watching because he knows that most women, up until now, which brings us to your point, have always been introjecting. But as Freud and Jung always said, you can only repress to a certain extent. You can only introject to a certain extent until the sump gets completely full. Then it's going to explode outwardly, which I don't believe is entirely a bad thing, because of all pathologies, one is just replacing the other, one is slightly less bad than the other. You see, it's all a matter of scale. The thing is, though, that if women, as you're saying, are starting to get either over, they become, the introjection is reaching its end.
Yes.
There is only one avenue left, and that is to start projecting it. I'm in favor of all emotions being accepted, and being, because I have a very healthy, I advocate a healthy relationship with what are mistakenly called darker emotions. They're only darker because you won't look at them. You won't shine the light of consciousness onto them. Now, there's a problem, because if women don't know how to healthily project their anger and these fantastic emotions, which they don't, which is critical, into art, into aesthetics, into sport, into something that's building them up, right? Bringing them in touch with their own creativity. Then, of course, another form of neurosis, another form of pathology will be created, in which it might be dysfunctionally projected. This has implications for children. This has implications for, just driving down the freeway, more road rage, or, it has sociological implications. But then we have to look at is, why is the sea change happening? There's deeper questions in all of this. It's very good. I always advocate in my work, you shouldn't be okay with injustice. You shouldn't be a smiling depressive. If you see things that are broken and corrupt, you should rebel against it. So if that's what's happening, and there is this outpouring of emotion because people are now sick of the cosmetics, the girls are waking up to realize, I'm not going to conform, it's no good, I want to be me. Who am I? I don't want to conform to all my peer groups. I'm not interested in what the media is broadcasting. I sense that it's rotten. Then, if they don't have the bridge to move it over, unfortunately, there's always a gray area between a period of change. And this is very difficult. In fact, we're finding it in a broader context, and I talk about this in my work on 2012, is that in this 13-year countdown cycle to the date of 2012, where there's a massive shift taking place from what might be described, if you permit me to use astrological jargon, from a Saturnian, masculine, patriarchal, phallocratic modality into the more Uranian, Piscean, Plutonic. People who are under the Saturnian, Martian, solar paradigm can't just change overnight, any more than anyone who's addicted to anything can change overnight. So what the person has to deal with, what the addict has to deal with, is this gray area, which is extremely uncanny and very disconcerting. And we don't have any models in our world for that. Shamanic traditions do. They'll guide you through it. They tell you about the wasteland, the wilderness, Moses going through the desert, Theseus going into the underworld, King Arthur going through, when the Grail is missing, the whole land dies and turns to snow, and the knights lose their power and their potency, or Samson losing his hair. There's this gray area that's known in the mythos and known in the fiction, but we don't know anything about it in this fast-paced, hypermanic world. So my message is, be okay with the emotions, be okay with it coming out, realize it's a healing process, but watch out for that gray area where you don't know how to let go of the Martian, solar, Saturnian, and wait to be guided to show you how to adopt that new modality.
Because a lot of women are being drugged right now. That is the opiate. It's psychoactive drugs.
Yeah, and of course that, if you don't mind me saying it, is also very much part of what religion has done.
Yes.
Because we have to learn how to identify the very forces that have kept both men and women in this polarized state. All religion is based on very powerful motifs. For instance, to cut a long story short, the chemical wedding, the supreme androgyny of the nucleation of both masculine and feminine. Not male and female, those are stereotypes.
Right.
Those are biology. But each individual, every man carries within him a woman. This was shown beautifully in the movie Life Force. There's an image of the perfect woman within our minds. In fact, in Celtic mythology, or I should say more correctly, Irish mythology, they personify those archetypes as literally goddesses. They represent the land and the sky, but they also represent a part of a man that he has to unite with. This is why the hair was long. Kings wore long hair. The pharaohs wore their lapels long. The Merovingians, wore the mane of the lion, partly because it was a sign of kingship, but partly because it identified you with the feminine principle. The Native American Indians go through the sun dance and other rituals. Why? To suffer pain that the woman experiences when giving birth. So these rites and rituals are to help you to not only deconstruct the hardened femininity, the hardened masculinity, so that the real chemical wedding can take place. Christianity and Judaism and Islam and all these religions co-opted this, skewed it, so that they then have this marriage ritual, physical marriage ritual, which is an entire parody of the chemical wedding, but they sell it to you in this basically glorified slavery way.
White fluffy dresses.
Yes, and their dresses, their costumery, their regalia, the designs of the churches, the salt water, all of that stuff. And then we find it, you step down a level, and you find that the entire corporate advertising world, the world of the merchants, the mercantile people, have done the same thing. I was showing examples of this in the talk, of how the male and female is portrayed in the movies and also in advertisements. But what's really being talked about there are not these inane stereotypes, but what's behind it. The archetypes of the masculine and the feminine. Because the last thing that these people want is for a person to start doing that holy work. Because the moment that you're taught how to do it yourself, you dispense with religions, you don't need them anymore. Because you realize you are the temple of the truth, or the temple of the all of God. But then another way to look at this problem is to ask the question, what was the woman's duty before the whole thing got skewed? Before she had to conform to these role models to succeed in the Saturnian system. In fact, one could pull out again and say, what was mankind, the whole of humankind's job, if this road, this diversion into technology and anti-natural thought patterns and selfless, this collectivism, say all those pernicious things that we should know about are pernicious, they're false. The question always then is, well then what is man meant to be doing? What is woman really meant to be doing? That question is much easier to answer if you examine women. It's much harder to say what a man's real job is if he's not Arnold Schwarzenegger or Ronald Reagan. If he's not a scientist and a sort of like a hunter.
If he doesn't have a business card.
He's not bringing home the meat.
Yeah.
I can't think of what he must be doing. What, sitting under a mushroom and meditating like a Taoist? See, we lose it.
Yeah.
However, we obviously know from anthropologists that the female were the keepers of the wisdom. We know this from Maria Gimbutas and so many other great scholars. So in other words, what's happening, how does this tie into the phenomena you're speaking of in the modern world? Because this Plutonic, or let's say countdown to 2012, whatever tradition you're coming from has different languaging for all of this. What happens if this expatiation of the anger and this outpouring is a cleansing process to get that holy grail, the female, back into her femininity, not as, when we had feminism, as a rebellion against the male.
Yes.
But an integration with a higher form of femininity, which ultimately is a unification with the masculine, say a spiritual move. I believe that's happening. These changes are Plutonic, and Pluto always goes to the deepest recesses of the being to find what's there, what's growing there. And whatever rank weeds and whatever is not sustainable, it will extract it, clean it off, and find what's precious and replant that.
So that's really the good news about this particular astrological cycle.
If people get with it on a mental level. Otherwise, they're in that gray area we talked about, and they'll get traumatized and then miss out on the guidance.
One of the ways in which this is showing itself among young girls is an extreme rebellion, as you were saying, against the advertising, backlash against the advertising industry and the brainwashing to be the superficial feminine, right down to becoming as masculinized as any man. And one of the phenomena that is happening even on YouTube is girl fighting. I mean, rough, toughs, punching each other in the face, girl fighting. I mean, this is obviously a somewhat distorted backlash to the phenomena that you're talking about.
I believe that Big Brother knows that this is going to happen. They have their fingers on the pulse of all of these psychic dynamics. And they're ready to create another arena so that you get diverted. You know, they go, over here, this is the way you're going to handle it. This happened even when women were forced to wear pants and all. There's good parts of it, bad, but you know, even the cosmetics about getting women away from a healthy sense of masculinity. Then feminism, most of the leading feminists were Fabians, funded and paid to distort femininity in another way with the promise that we're introducing you to it. It was just man-hate under another guise. You know,
And Russo said that it was essentially created, it was a Rockefeller agenda to create more people onto the tax rolls, get the women working.
Yeah, Kate Millett was an absolute bona fide psychotic. She spent time in lunatic asylums and stuff like that, yeah. She was easily manipulated and stuff into doing what they wanted.
There's something else that comes in about, this would have been in the mid-1960s when some of this was starting to take seed. One of the things I've thought of many times, and you and I talked about this off camera, which is really appalling, is the new Levi's ad. But let's go back to when Levi's really caught on, because I was a young girl in the United States at that time, and I remember exactly when myself and my pod, we were identical, all started wearing Levi's at the same time. This would have been around 1963, 1964. At the same time, there was an agenda that was uncovered that another person gave me. That was about, it's in the congressional record about the larger, essentially kind of a Marxist agenda that was going to be foisted upon the American people, almost every point of which has already taken place by now. This whole thing about Levi, this utilitarian type of clothing that we're all to stuff ourselves in and do up to this very day, right down to the iconography and the most recent advertisement by Levi. Can you talk about your perceptions of what this utilitarian kind of blue cloth means to us as feminine and masculine?
Well, it sends a message on one level that don't be showy, you know, dress down, be normal, this kind of idea. But like in anything, it's not so much the product.
Yeah.
The product may be good, it may be bad, it may be meaningless. My interest is always this commercial advertising shell that sells anything, be it toothpaste or soap or jeans. Now, I'm worried about the name Levi because I know where that word comes from. I haven't looked into it. It may be legitimate name, Levi Strauss. But the fact that it became a corporate logo, you know, sets it into another field of analysis. In exactly
Tell
the
us
same.
about that.
Well, Levite.
Levite.
Right? It's the Old Testament. 501 is gematria for phallus, for penis. The most famous genes of Levi's 501.
I should know that. I've never heard that till now.
Yeah, 501 is gematria, Hebrew gematria for the phallus.
That's what I started wearing. Everyone wore 501s.
Because the woman is being conformed to act like a man.
The flesh of the woman is also at this time being constricted in very harsh cloth and covered, which is really antithetical to our skin.
That's right. But remember, they also think of phallic, you can have a word phallic, which is referring to the genitals themselves. And then you have ithiphallic, which means any phallic-looking thing.
Yes.
But any phallic-looking thing, like a monument, or the human body. The human body is ithiphallic. So the clothes that then clothe that body are either going to be a surrogate feminine symbol, which is why the popes and the cardinals wear the feminine robes, it's tied into the same thing, or in daily secular life, you'll see them trying to stuff us into Levi jeans, or women are making that attractive. And all the men in those ads are actually androgynous men. They may look hard-bodied, actually, but they're not, as a matter of fact. The women in the advertisements watching the guy washes Levi's, if you look at the way they filmed that, they're actually having these girls really look into a mirror of who they'd like to be. It's not a real male, it's an image of a male in a girl's mind. Mm-hmm. So we're into the realm of psychology, you see?
Yes.
And
it's very androgynous.
It's very deep.
The latest ads are extremely androgynous.
Sure they are.
And there is the push toward violence. There's the half-sunken, half-submerged sign, America blinking in and out, and the neon sign. I don't know if you've seen this one, with Walter, famous poet, rebel poet, Walt Whitman, supposedly an old wax seal of his voice.
And it's always black and white.
Yes.
Yeah, God, what a horrible... How dare they even use that man's poetry in that context?
Oh.
But don't even get me started.
He's got to be rolling over.
Don't even get me started on how they use not only a false nostalgic, pseudo-nostalgic, Spielberg-esque, black and white images of a golden glowing America, which never existed. Don't get me started on how they use classical music and debauch it to sell soap or toothpaste or some nonsense. How they use femininity, decapitated women, animals, nature, the rest of it. glorified images of grandparents sucking toffees with a little kid in the rocking chair. Did this ever happen? Are we in the world of the living and the sane? No, but we're in the realm of Hollywood and Madison Avenue, in which even, well, why do you think that Spielberg's, in umpteen movies that he's made, keeps referring not only to these fake nostalgic images of the past, like he does this constantly in Indiana Jones and even in other films that he's done. He's very retro in his movies. He will even have images in his movies of other movies. In Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skulls, his partner turns up on a Harley dressed like Marlon Brando.
Yeah.
Does anybody notice what is going on in this ridiculous thing? I saw another movie, I think it was Demolition Man, in which the female cop, lieutenant, they're all retro because they're so future that they have the quaint, they listen to these little jingles on the radio. It's an interesting film. And they have these quaint romantic interests in the past. But actually on a subtextual level, when she takes the Sylvester Stallone character into her office while they're looking on the computer or something, in the background are posters of Die Hard. And in that same movie, Demolition Man, when Sylvester Stallone character and the lady cop are driving in her car, she says that in the past Arnold Schwarzenegger became the president. And they have this little weird scene about, you kidding me?
Yeah.
So again, another in-movie reference in a movie.
Yes.
And people think that's Hollywood is cool. No, it's not. That is saying that you have now entered the world of reality TV, meaning TV has become your reality. Reality doesn't exist. I was up in Trafford Mall. I talked in Bath in March of this year, 2010, and then I went with a friend up to Manchester. The biggest spectacle up there now is this gargantuan mall. He goes, you got to see this because
I haven't seen it.
And he's telling me you got to see this because you're just going to believe it in symbolism. It's got every Greek god that the mind could dream up.
In Manchester?
Yeah, in Manchester, at a place where the Manchester United football team used to play, Trafford. Well, they built this palace of Versailles. And here you go, schlepping up with your shopping bags, and you look like you're going up the gardens of Versailles Palace. And you walk in, and there's immense chandeliers. You've got spiral staircases and marble. Everything is just plants and goddesses and weird occult phrases and solar discs and ram's head and Bacchus and hearts, Christian red heart of Jesus. And I've got photographs. I took meticulous photographs of all of this. And I'm not even including the architecture itself. Or the fact that the murals or the names of the shops. We're leaving that out. We're just talking about floor design, mosaics, gods and goddesses, Kabbalism. What's this all about? Half the people in it having the foggiest idea about Greek and Latin, Greek and Roman gods, and yet here they are in a palace. Why? It's to make your little hovel, sitting in your home, a secondary home. We don't want you to be at home in that little box that we've given you. Come and drink coffee in this beautiful palatial place. Do you know that they even had gazebos inside? Did you know that they had a ship motif with a band playing on the stage, as if you're out on the ocean on a cruise? Then at night, in the daytime, the roof is clouds. As evening falls in real time, real life, stars come out inside the mall. So in other words, these people
it's kind of like Las Vegas, the Paris. And,
yeah, I think they've got this. That was the first time I've ever experienced this. I'm blown away. And that we sat there, observed.
It's disorienting.
Yeah. And what it's really doing is saying, forget reality, forget nature. We're making a facsimile of it. The Taco Bell